So now we are going to make vanilla butter cake, and that uses eggs. So the butter cake, obviously the fat content is there, and the fat content comes from the butter. So when there is butter in the recipe, usually it is the creaming method, unless otherwise if the recipe calls for melting the butter. But ideally, if there is butter and there is a butter sponge, we have to start with beating the butter on the sugar and cream that. We've seen it quite a lot of times in the past, and get that to creamy, light and fluffy, right? And then add the eggs one at a time. Now when it comes to layered cakes, for me to have the layered sponges really very light is very important, especially when it is butter cake. I do not recommend soaking the butter cake with sugar syrup. So keeping the sponge itself really very light is important. So to achieve that, what I have done here is to not use the eggs as whole in the recipe, but to separate the egg and keep yolk separately and white separately. Now the white I'm going to beat at the end and make a very fluffy, spongy, texture. We call it meringue. So I'm going to beat the whites at the end and add little sugar into it, and then make a foamy white voluminous mass, okay, and that I'm going to fold it into the batter. So what that is going to do is to lighten up the sponge and have the butter cake itself with more volume and keep it very light. And when this being part in between the fillings that we're going to add is going to be really very light, and being it butter, it is not going to be dense. So to have the butter sponge very light, this technique involves separating the whites and the yolk, and yolk will go into the recipe like egg goes into any creaming method, but then only yolk is used at that place and whites are used at the end. So the ingredients I have here are the butter, sugar, yolk, egg whites, and that is milk, vanilla extract. For the dry, we have salt, baking powder and all-purpose flour. Okay, so I'm going to start with sifting the dry ingredients and then setting them aside before we begin. So I am putting the rest aside. Then I have a bowl with a metal sieve. Into that I'm going to add the all-purpose flour, baking powder, salt. Now I'm going to sift this so that will combine the baking powder, salt and the all-purpose flour. So I am sifted, and then this I'm just going to keep that aside, and I have two 6-inch cake pans that are prepared, lined with butter paper and dusted with all-purpose flour as well, and sponges to avoid the dough. You can see most of the recipes get baked at 180 Celsius, but here we have to preheat the oven at 160 Celsius. So you avoid having the dome on the top, and also it is going to have a flat top and even baking. Okay, so preheat your oven to 160 Celsius, and to begin with I'm adding the butter into the bowl of the stand mixer. And I'm going to beat the butter first and allow it to become light, and then add the sugar. And to this you can see I have attached the paddle attachment. The butter is softened up. To this I'm going to add sugar, but out of this I'm going to retain a little bit. Okay, add 3/4 into the butter, and this I'm going to retain to add along with the whites. Now this I'm going to beat on medium-high speed for about 5 to 7 minutes until the butter and the sugar becomes cream, light, fluffy. Just going to check and then scrape. Okay, so I'm going to continue beating again. So now you can see it is nicely creamed up, pale, light and fluffy. Okay, so this is the texture we are looking at. And to this I'm going to add the yolk. Okay, so the one yolk is added. I'm placing the bowl back. I'm going to beat for about a minute until the yolk completely gets incorporated. Now one yolk is incorporated fully. Okay, so into this I'm going to add the second yolk as well. Now this again I'm going to beat on medium high speed for about 1 minute. So to this I'm going to add the vanilla extract and beat until the vanilla extract gets incorporated. Okay, and to this now let me scrape and show. So that's how it looks after the addition of 2 yolks. Okay. Now to this I'm going to add the dry ingredients, which is the flour and then the milk. Now we've already seen, but I'm just going to explain again. And to this, when the dry ingredients, now the batter is almost ready except for white has to go in, right? Now we have the dry ingredients and then the milk, which is the liquid part. Now we need to add the flour in 3 parts and the milk in 2 parts, alternating the both and starting and ending with the flour, which means the first part of flour goes in. We need to beat just for 5 to maybe 7-8 seconds, and then add the milk, one part of the milk, beat again for 5 to 8 seconds, and second part of the flour goes in, beat, then the last part of milk goes in, which is the second part of the milk, then again beat, and then the third part of the flour goes in and then beat again. Everything has to happen in few seconds. We are doing this to avoid overbeating after the stage, because the airiness and the texture to the cake has been already done by beating the butter and the sugar, and beyond the stage if you overbeat, then the cake will become very tough. So it is very important after this stage you need to not overbeat, and to avoid that step of overbeating we are alternating the flour and the milk, and we need to fold and beat for few seconds only, so you have the right texture of the cake. Now to start with, I'm just going to Add one part of the flour, and I'm folding it only because you don't want the flour to splatter out. So once you know it's just combined, now put this into the beater and beat for just few seconds like I said, and do not overbeat. So that is all is the time that you need to allow for beating. I'm just going to scrape the paddle attachment as well from the beater. And to this. So that is how it's going to look after the first part of the flour. And now I'm going to add half of the milk. You're going to gently fold. And then beat again for a few seconds. You want to allow the milk to get incorporated. So now it looks like this after the first milk addition. To this second part of the flour. Now this will be the last part. I'm going to fold. Now beating this again. Second addition of the flour looks like this. Okay, to this I'm going to add the last and the second portion of the milk. Just mix it because there's butter there. Milk wouldn't incorporate so very easily. We need to beat this. Just roughly mix it and put it back and allow the beater to combine the batter. Scrape down. So now the batter is just starting to become really beautiful. You can see the second addition of milk is just made it very smooth. To this, the last flour goes in. I'm going to fold it. Okay, just rough folding is enough because beater is going to take care of the rest. But the only thing we need to pay attention is to not overbeat. So now the work with the paddle and the flour, butter, sugar part is over. Now we still have one last step left where we need to beat the whites. Right, before that, let me just clean the blade. You don't want to waste up. Now scrape through. That's how it's going to look before adding the whites. Okay, now when we add the white, this is going to further lighten up. Okay, so now I'm going to set this aside. Now, if you have to do this step, you have to be careful that you need to wash your beater blade. Now, if you're going to do this using a KitchenAid like this, then what you need to do at this step, because I have the second bowl, the first one is still there with the batter, I haven't transferred. Now, if you have only one bowl, then what you need to do, transfer this into another bigger bowl so you could fold it properly later, have that much of space, and wash this bowl completely. And you could also use lemon and then completely wash it because it should be void, it should be free of any little fat that comes from the yolk and then the butter also. Now the beater that I'm going to use is the wire whisk. So paddle is not the one I'm going to use for the whites. Now if you are using a handheld beater, then maybe you could switch over to another stainless steel bowl which is clean, dry and void of any fat that may be remaining from where you used previously, right? So washing it and drying it, washing and having little water droplets is going to spoil the step, and not washing it properly is also going to spoil the step. So you need to have a dry cloth and then wipe after you washed completely, and that is very, very important. And now you are going to follow after this how the whites is going to change from being that liquid white state and then foam up and become very frothy and beautiful white foam, like cloud like it is going to get. Now if in any of the stages you feel that the white doesn't match up to what you're seeing here in this lesson, then you need to scrape it off, trash it and then redo that step. So there could be few reasons for the whites to not foam up and froth. Now if the whites, when you're separating, if it had a little bit of yolk that is gone inside, then your whites is not going to foam up because there is little bit of fat in that yolk from the yolk, fat in the whites from the yolk, and then it is not going to froth up. Now if there's that little bit of fat in the bowl that you're going to do, again it is very important that if it froths and doesn't froth and if it stays in the liquid state, then it will never froth up at all. So you have to trash it and take care of the steps, which is to wash it and pat it completely dry and then start over for the step. Okay, now I'm going to add the white in first. and start beating on medium speed, okay. And you'll see the white is just going to froth up, become very foamy, bubbly and get white. Okay, I'm going to take it out and show how it looks. And from then on, you need to keep adding the sugar a little at a time in a slow stream as the beater is running. Now, if you're going to use a handheld beater and do, then what you will do, you will use one hand, right, and then hold the bowl. Now, every maybe a minute or 30 seconds once, you will take a spoonful of the sugar and then sprinkle over and not drop it in one place, and leave the spoon aside and then keep beating for 30 more seconds, and then add another spoon, sprinkle the sugar over and then keep beating. So, you need to alternate between adding the sugar and beating if you are doing a handheld, using a handheld beater. Now, if you are using a stand mixer, then allow the stand mixer to run as you keep adding the sugar in a slow stream. So, you can see it is beginning to froth up. So, let me open to show how the frothy whites look like. So, it's going to look like this, okay. And now I'm going to keep beating and add the sugar in a slow stream. Just after a few minutes of the sugar addition, you can see the peaks are not going to be stiff at this stage, okay. So, it is going to be loose and it is going to fall back. Now, what we are looking at is stiff peaks, but still the whites, the meringue to be shiny but stiff, okay. So, I just wanted to show that stage. When you see this, you have to know that you need to continue beating further some time. So, I am going to check. You can see it is just staying stiff, and you can also see it is shiny, okay. You can see the difference between how it was before and now, okay. So, this is the stiff peaks. It's not going to fall down as we lift and show, okay. So, now this is the beautiful meringue now. So, I am going to show you how to incorporate the white into the batter that we made. I am just going to mix it up now. This white I am just going to add it in 3 parts, okay. So, the first part I am just adding it into the batter. You take the white and then add it into the batter, okay. Now I am going to gently fold. Now the whites have whipped up, creating a volume. That little egg white that was added, and look at the volume that it is formed, right. Now we need to be careful at this stage in trying not to reduce, deflate the volume that the whites have given us, and because that is going to be the volume of the final cake also. So you need to cut and fold, which is this part is cutting, and then you are going underneath and then folding and then cutting and folding and then cutting. So that will make sure that's incorporating but not over mixing. So at this stage you need to avoid doing the over mixing part, and after the first stage of the addition of the white, you can see some little streaks of the white remaining, but you do not need to incorporate it completely at the first addition itself. Okay, so now I am just going to add the second part. Now I am going to fold, cut and fold. Make sure you are just breaking the white but not deflating it. Deflating is just removing the air and the volume that it has created, right. So little white streaks are there. Now I am going for the third and the last addition. So finally all the whites are added in. Now so all the whites have been incorporated, and now you can see the batter is loosened up also, but it is not very runny, right. This is the consistency we are looking at, and now that the batter is ready, let's fill the pans. I am just going to divide this between two 6-inch pans. To be very precise, you could use a weighing scale and then divide the batter. So you know this we will be using to make one cake, and we want the height of the layers to be even as we cut each of this sponge into 2 layers. Leveling the top. As it is a thick batter, it is not going to run by itself and then settle down. Okay, now I am going to tap the pan to get rid of any bigger air bubbles, and this needs to go into the oven directly to get baked at 160 degrees Celsius, anywhere between 25 to 30 minutes. On keep a check when the toothpick comes out clean, and maybe on the edges if you have it golden brown, or depending on the oven the entire top could be golden brown, or maybe it doesn't turn brown at all. So whatever that is, when the toothpick comes out clean, keep a check after 25 minutes. And when the toothpick comes out clean, you have to allow them to cool in the room temperature for 15 minutes, and then I am going to get back to show you how to cling wrap this and then store it to further use it to layer the cakes. So the vanilla butter cake is come out. You know, it's done when you insert the toothpick, and it is just come out clean. Like I said, you don't have to wait for browning. The edges have browned depending on the oven. The top could brown as well, so not to worry if you find it any different than what you see here. And now when you have the cake 15 minutes out of the oven, while it is still warm, do not allow your sponges to be lying in the room temperature for a longer period of time. You don't have to wait to get the sponge or the cake to come down to complete room temperature. By doing that, you are going to get the sponge dry. So when you know it is still warm and you are able to handle the pan, okay, get the cling wrap out, transfer the cake onto the cling wrap directly because it is going to be too soft, and remove the butter paper lining, okay, and then wrap it gently because it is going to be soft at this stage, right? So don't put too much pressure or you might lose out on the circle shape. Now wrap it once and make sure there is no bigger air pockets inside or any holes through which the air could go in. Now check for the bigger air pockets and release the air, and then let the cling wrap tightly pack around on the cake. Now one layer is not enough because it is going to allow the moisture to escape. So once you've done, do another layer of cling wrap. And then seal that. So this step is very, very crucial to have your layered cakes not to dry. Otherwise, you're just going to complain or have people complaining about your cakes being dry if you haven't overbaked. See, that one stage where you could have your sponges dry is you have overbaked it. Now that is why we are keeping a check at the place where when the toothpick comes out clean, you have to take it out. And the next place where your cakes could turn out dry is when you are going to allow the sponge to be exposed in room temperature. So while it is still warm, cling wrap it in 2 layers, making sure there is no air pockets locked in. 2 layers of cling wrap. So this you will do to any sponge that you're going to use for layering. If you're going to fill and frost a cake, except for a tea cake or a travel cake that you're going to use it without any layering. This is the step that we will be following in all the lessons where layering is going to be there. So after the cling wrap stage, the sponges have to be kept in the freezer. Freezer is the place where water turns into ice, which means the water solidifies. That is where the sponges have to be kept, and you need to place the sponges one next to the other, and while it is still soft. Now after an hour in the freezer, while they have been kept one next to the other, you will find that the sponges have firmed up and they are really very solid. At that stage, you could take the sponge and then place one on top of the other, allowing more freezer space to keep more things inside. Now when you are ready to frost the cake, now you have to take the sponges out of the freezer and keep it in the room temperature. 30 minutes you are ready to frost the cake, and you have to keep the cling wrap on. Allow the condensation to happen on the outside, and after 30 minutes you have to remove. At the end of 30 minutes you have to be sure that the sponge is still firm and cold, and we are only letting the condensation to happen on the outside, and then you remove the cling wrap when you are exactly ready to toast them and then layer them. So the timing that you plan to take the cake out of the freezer is when you have to keep rest of all the elements ready for the filling, and your cream and everything has to be ready at the end of the 30 minutes. And so you have the sponge at the right time for you to be able to cut and then layer, and you have all the other filling and the frosting elements also. So you could layer them while the cake is firm and cold. This step is very important to have your cakes right, to have a hassle-free, stress-free layering. Your cakes have to be firm and they have to go into the freezer, not into the refrigerator. And you cannot bake a cake and use it for layering the same day when it is baked. Okay, so this is part of pre-prep. Baking sponge itself should happen the previous day, than the time when you need to layer them, finish layering and frosting them. So this storing of cake part is very important, that you will follow to any sponge that you will be making in any part of the lesson or in the future also.